April 1945. Germany was not retreating anymore. It was coming apart. American units were moving so fast that whole German formations were walking out of forests with white cloth tied to rifle barrels. Farm roads were filling with prisoners. Staff officers were trying to count men faster than the front could collapse. And then on one muddy road, everything stopped. A German prisoner dropped to his knees. He was exhausted, shaking. His hands were empty. He looked at the American guard nearest him and asked for one thing: water. The guard reached for his canteen. Before he could pull it free, a pistol cracked. The prisoner fell into the mud. He had not been shot by an American. He had not tried to escape. He had been killed by another prisoner. An SS officer in the same column had stepped out of line, drawn a hidden Walther pistol, and shot a man for begging for water. Seconds later, General George S. Patton's command car came around the bend. The men on that road knew Patton's reputation. They knew the temper, the ivory-handled pistols, the speeches, the stories that made him sound less like a general and more like a weapon wearing a uniform. So when he saw the dead prisoner and the SS officer still holding the pistol, many of them expected one thing: immediate execution. But Patton did not draw. He did not shout first. He did not let the road become a firing squad. What he did instead revealed something colder, harder, and in some ways more important than anger. He forced the war to answer a question it could not avoid anymore. When a murderer is standing 6 feet away with the weapon still in his hand, does justice mean revenge, or does justice mean order? By the third week of April 1945, Patton's Third Army had been driving across Europe for months with almost no real pause. It had broken out of Normandy, torn through France, crossed into Germany, and swallowed German prisoners by the tens of thousands. Maps were changing so quickly that some headquarters officers could barely keep their overlays current. But the roads did not look like victory. They looked like wreckage. Fields were cut open by tank tracks. Barn roofs sagged from shell bursts. Burned vehicles sat at intersections like blackened warning signs. Prisoners moved west in long gray columns, some still wearing decent boots, others with their faces hollowed by hunger and sleeplessness. Patton liked to see the front with his own eyes. That was not theater, not entirely. He believed a commander who only read reports would eventually start commanding a war that existed only on paper. So he rode forward often, sometimes too far forward, pushing his small convoy along roads that had been marked cleared but not yet made safe. That morning his car was moving through a recently overrun stretch of German countryside. A jeep ran ahead. A Dodge command car followed. Another jeep and a half-track trailed behind, carrying a small security detail. No one expected a battle there. That was exactly why the road was dangerous. A prisoner column had been gathered nearby by American infantry. Roughly 200 Germans were moving west under guard. Most were regular army men. Some were old enough to be the fathers of the American soldiers watching them. Some were boys trying not to look like boys, and a few were SS. You could see it in the cut of the uniform. The collar marks not yet stripped away, the way certain men carried themselves even after capture. One of them was an officer, not a high commander, not a famous name, but an SS officer all the same. He walked with his back straight, his face composed, as if surrender had changed his circumstances, but not his beliefs. The Americans had searched the prisoners. But searches in a collapsing war were rarely perfect. Men were tired, columns were too large, guards were too few, clothing was layered, holsters could be hidden, weapons missed, discipline assumed where none existed. And somewhere on that officer's body, a pistol had survived the search. The prisoner who stepped out of line was not SS. He was an ordinary German soldier, older than many of the men around him, with the ruined look of a man whose body had used its last reserves before noon. He stumbled off the road. A guard shouted for him to stay in line. The man did not run. He sank to his knees. His hands went into the mud. Then he looked up and said one word the American corporal did not need a dictionary to understand. Wasser, water. The corporal was 19. He had been in Europe long enough to learn the difference between danger and misery. And this was misery. The prisoner was not threatening him. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold his hands together. So the corporal reached for his canteen. That small movement mattered, because for 1 second, on a road where armies had spent years learning how to kill, a soldier was about to do the simplest human thing imaginable. He was going to give water to a beaten enemy. The SS officer moved before the canteen cleared the strap. 3 fast steps. A pistol appeared in his hand. The barrel dropped toward the kneeling man's head. The prisoner collapsed forward. The road froze. The American corporal stood with the canteen half off his shoulder. The guards lifted their rifles. The German column shuddered backward and forward at the same time, men trying to move away without looking like they were moving, and the SS officer stood over the body. He did not run. He did not beg. He did not throw the weapon down. He held it at his side with the awful calm of a man who believed he had merely enforced a rule. That was the moment Patton's convoy arrived. The lead jeep stopped hard. Patton's driver braked behind it. Before the car had fully settled, Patton was already up, one hand on the windshield frame, eyes moving across the scene. The body, the kneeling mud, the corporal with the canteen, the prisoners frozen in the road, the SS officer with the pistol still in his hand. Men who later described the moment did not remember an explosion of rage. They remembered something worse. Focus. Patton stepped out of the car. He wore the polished helmet liner, the field uniform, and the 2 sidearms that had become almost inseparable from his legend. But he did not touch them. He walked toward the SS officer and stopped a few feet away. For a moment there was no speech, only wind, only engines, only the sound of 200 prisoners holding themselves still. Patton looked down at the dead man. Then he looked at the pistol. Then he looked into the face of the SS officer. The obvious thing, the thing many men expected, was simple. Order a rifleman forward. End it there. No paperwork, no tribunal, no argument. The killer had been seen. The weapon was in his hand. The victim was lying on the road. And Patton, of all men, could have made that order feel natural to the men around him. That is why the moment matters, because restraint from a gentle man can be mistaken for temperament. Restraint from Patton was something else. It was command. He ordered the SS officer disarmed. Not shot, disarmed. He ordered him separated from the column. Not beaten, separated. He ordered a written report prepared and sent through the chain of command before the prisoners reached the processing point. Not forgotten. Recorded. Then he made the meaning of the order clear. The officer would answer for murder. He would be held under guard. He would be tried. And whatever punishment came would come through evidence, procedure, and military law. This was not mercy. Mercy would have been softness. This was harder than mercy. This was an army refusing to become a mob just because the mob had an excuse. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand what April 1945 felt like to the men moving through Germany. The war was nearly over, but it was not gentle. Berlin was being crushed from the east. German armies were breaking into pockets. Officers were burning files. Civilians were hanging white sheets from windows. Teenagers in oversized uniforms were being shoved into roads and told to stop tanks with weapons they barely understood. And the SS did not stop killing. Even as the Reich collapsed, SS men executed deserters. They hanged civilians accused of defeatism. They shot laborers, camp prisoners, and sometimes their own soldiers, not because those deaths could change the war, but because terror was the last language the system still knew how to speak. The killing on that road was small compared with the crimes already being uncovered across Germany. One pistol, one victim, one muddy roadside. But it was the same logic in miniature. A man asks for water. Another man decides that asking makes him unworthy to live. That was what Patton had stepped into. Not battlefield combat, not a duel, not confusion, an execution. By then, American soldiers had begun seeing things many of them could not fit into ordinary language. Camps, bodies stacked like cordwood. Living prisoners who weighed less than boys. Evidence that murder had been made administrative, scheduled, guarded, and filed. Patton had seen enough of that world to know what the SS represented. So no one on that road would have been surprised if he had let anger decide. But Patton's view of war was not simple bloodlust, even if his public image sometimes made it look that way. He believed in violence. He used it. He drove men hard, sometimes brutally, because he believed speed and force saved lives in the larger arithmetic of war. But he also believed an army had boundaries. Combat was one thing. Murder was another. A man shooting at you was an enemy. A man who had surrendered was a prisoner. A prisoner who murdered another prisoner was not a battlefield opponent anymore. He was a criminal inside the army's custody, and if the army answered that crime with another illegal killing, then the line it claimed to defend became harder to see. That line was not sentimental, it was strategic. Under the laws of war, prisoners were supposed to be protected from violence, intimidation, and murder. The 1929 Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War had given those ideas a legal shape long before that April morning. But laws on paper only matter when tired men with weapons choose to obey them. That is the part history often makes too clean. It is easy to praise justice in a courtroom. It is harder to protect it on a cold road when a dead man is at your feet, and every armed soldier nearby is waiting for permission to make the answer simple. Patton did not make it simple. He made it official. The pistol was taken. The SS officer was pulled away from the column and placed under close guard. The dead man remained by the road until Graves' registration could reach him. The prisoner column began moving again, quieter than before. And the young corporal still had the canteen. Think about that detail. He had tried to help, not heroically, not theatrically, just with the kind of decency that disappears from history because it leaves almost no paper trail. He saw a beaten man ask for water and reached for what he had. He was not fast enough, and for the rest of his life, if he lived long enough to go home, that may have been the part that stayed with him. The strap, the hand, the shot, the canteen that never reached the man who needed it. Records can tell us ranks, unit movements, dates, and sentences. They cannot always tell us what a 19-year-old soldier carried home in silence. Patton stood near the road for several minutes after the officer was secured. He did not give a speech. He did not turn the dead man into a symbol in front of the prisoners. That would have been the theatrical Patton, the version people expected. Instead, he watched the column move. He watched the guards recover their formation. He watched order reassemble itself, piece by piece, after one pistol shot had tried to tear it open. Then he returned to his command car. The convoy moved on. The war did not stop for one dead prisoner. Wars almost never do. But the record did not entirely lose him. The incident report moved through the prisoner handling system. The SS officer was held apart from the others. Witnesses identified what had happened. The weapon, the body, the guard statements, and the officer's status became the pieces of a legal case. After Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the military justice machinery expanded across the occupation zones. Some cases would become famous, most would not. There were trials in rooms with plain walls, officers at tables, translators working through testimony. Defendants who had once believed rank or ideology placed them beyond ordinary judgment. The SS officer from the road was not a headline case. He was not Nuremberg, but the principle was the same. The murder of a prisoner was not an administrative inconvenience. It was not a battlefield accident. It was a crime, and the man who committed it would be made to answer as a man, not disappear into the fog of a dying regime. That is why this small roadside incident reaches beyond itself. Nuremberg did not appear out of nowhere in November 1945. It grew from a larger Allied decision that crimes committed in uniform still belonged to law, that orders did not wash blood from a man's hands, that a state could train, authorize, and reward murder, and the individuals who carried it out could still be held responsible. The famous defendants would later make the principle visible to the world. But the principle had to survive smaller tests first. A checkpoint, a prisoner cage, a column on a road, a corpse in the mud, a commander with enough power to do anything, and enough discipline not to do the easiest thing. Patton did not spare the SS officer. That is the misunderstanding. He did not save him from punishment. He saved the army from answering murder with a second murder. There is a hard difference between those two things, and Patton understood hard differences. He understood the difference between fear and caution, between speed and recklessness, between killing in combat and killing because a helpless man offended you. He was not a saint. His career does not allow that simple version. He was vain, profane, brilliant, cruel in some moments, exact in others. He had nearly destroyed his own career in Sicily by striking hospitalized soldiers. He could humiliate men. He could drive formations beyond what many commanders believed possible. But complexity is not the same as contradiction. The same man who could be harsh about combat discipline could also insist that discipline was the only thing that made an army morally and practically different from a gang with better equipment. An army that murders prisoners teaches the enemy what to do to its own captured men. An army that ignores murder inside its custody tells its soldiers that rage outranks command. An army that stops recording crimes because the war is almost over proves that law only mattered when it was easy. On that road, Patton refused all three. The most revealing part is not that he acted. Any commander had to act. The revealing part is the shape of the action. He did not make the dead prisoner vanish into the speed of the advance. He did not let the SS officer hide inside the prisoner column. He did not pretend the Americans had not seen enough. He did not turn the crime into personal theater. He reduced the scene to its essential facts. A prisoner had been murdered. The murderer was in custody. The army would answer through law. That was the whole command. And because it was the whole command, it was enough. By the summer and autumn of 1945, the world was learning to put names, charges, and documents onto crimes so large they threatened to break ordinary speech. Crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity. Those words can sound formal now. almost distant, because they have been repeated for generations. But in 1945, they were still being forced into public meaning. They had to cover the camps, the massacres, the executions, the death marches, the prison columns, and yes, even the small roadside killing of a nameless man who asked for water. Not because the scale was the same, it was not, but because the moral structure was the same. A human being under control of armed authority had been denied the basic protection owed to him. The law said that mattered. Patton made sure it mattered. He did not live to see all the verdicts that followed. In December 1945, months after the German surrender, Patton was injured in a car accident near Mannheim. The crash itself was not spectacular. Others in the car survived with far less harm. Patton did not. A spinal injury left him paralyzed, and 12 days later he died in a hospital in Germany. He was buried in Luxembourg among the soldiers of the Third Army as he had wanted. That burial has its own terrible symmetry. A commander who spent so much of his life chasing movement ended the war lying still among the men he had driven across Europe. But the road in April remains one of the quieter measures of him. Not the speech, not the pistols, not the legend, a dead prisoner, a hidden pistol, a young corporal with a canteen in his hand, and a general who understood that the last days of a war are precisely when armies are most tempted to stop obeying the rules that prove what they are. The prisoner who asked for water has no famous grave in this story, no monument, no remembered speech. He was a German soldier in the wrong army at the end of the wrong war, and in the available accounts he survives mostly as a role, a rank, an approximate age, and a death. That is often how history keeps the powerless, not as full lives, as traces. But traces can still accuse. A man knelt. He asked for water. A guard tried to help. An SS officer killed him. Patton arrived. And the answer was not a bullet fired back into the killer's head. The answer was arrest, witnesses, a report, a trial, a sentence, accountability. Not because the war required mercy, because order required memory, because law means nothing if it disappears the moment rage has a good excuse, because the difference between an army and a mob can become very small on a muddy road, small enough to fit inside a trigger pull, small enough to fit inside a canteen strap, small enough to depend on one commander stepping out of a car, looking at a murderer, and refusing to let justice become another word for revenge.